Hi everybody! Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Chay Lectures about Dramaturgy. In this lecture I'm going to be exploring the text. How were these plays developed, what makes these playwrights unique, and some helpful hints for reading A Doll's House Part 2. First, let's go over the genesis of these shows, the inspiration for the content, and how they were developed. In the Playwrights lecture, I mentioned the real-life inspiration for Nora Helmer, Laura Peterson Keeler. Keeler was an author and an apprentice of sorts to Ibsen. Her husband was diagnosed with tuberculosis and was prescribed a vacation in a warmer climate. Keeler took out a loan to do this, but as a married woman, had to forge the paperwork to do so. When her husband found out about the forgery, he threw her into an asylum against her will. She told Ibsen about what happened, and he was deeply disturbed. Her story is the direct inspiration for A Doll's House. However, Laura Keeler's story was not the only thing that influenced A Doll's House and the character of Nora. Previous characters of Ibsen's show signs of being precursors to Nora. Selma, in League of Youth, has a monologue with some notable similarities to Nora. How I've longed for even a little share in your worries, but when I asked, all you did was laugh it off with a joke. You dressed me up like a doll. You played with me as you might play with a child. Now I don't want any of your troubles. I am leaving you. Although Selma does not actually leave her husband, you can see the similarities between her and Nora. Another precursor to Nora is Lana Hellel in Pillars of Society. Lana has short hair, wears men's boots, and is decidedly single. She, like Nora, has a real-life inspiration as well. The most notorious woman in Norway, Asta Hansteen. Hansteen was one of the first women's rights activists, and one of the most vocal. She was also the first female portrait painter in the city of Christiania, the first woman to be published in New Norsk, and the first woman to give a public lecture in Norway. The other real-life inspiration for Nora is Camilla Collett. Collett was a family friend of the Ibsens. She was also an active part in the feminist movements in Norway, and along with Ibsen's wife, she helped convince Ibsen to start paying attention to the feminist movement. So, if Ibsen was inspired by real people and a few of his own characters, what got Nath started on A Doll's House Part 2? Well, it actually started out as a joke, and I am serious about that. Nath thought that A Doll's House Part 2 was a funny title. Intriguing, goofy, and who has the audacity to write a sequel to a literary classic a century and a half later? And then it was commissioned. Nath's first step in the writing process was to use the Socratic method. Sort of. He would ask random people what they thought happened to Nora after she started her own life. Most people thought that she failed. Nath wrote this play a little bit out of spite. Nora was not going to fail in his version. One of the most important things about these plays is the style of them. Each of these playwrights has pushed boundaries in one way or another with these works, and we need to take a look at that to understand the significance of these plays and why A Doll's House Part 2 holds up. Many people refer to Ibsen as the father of modernism. I personally like to refer to him as the father of mutton chops. I mean, look at those absolute units! Anyway, his works are revolutionary in their style and function, and they are the reason that theater today is the way it is. But what exactly does that entail? Ibsen was writing in a time when plays were very different than what we see in contemporary theater. The plays of the era focused on the upper class and their sexual endeavors and other charming misbehaviors. The language was lofty and often in rhymed verse. This was due to restrictions by governments who didn't want to be called out for the terrible things they do. So it was not common for these plays to have a lot of substance in them, at least outright. Playwrights snuck social commentary into their works as much as they could. Ibsen, on the other hand, made his social commentary outright. His subjects and characters were realistic and very controversial depictions of middle-class life. Problems in the home, problems with the government, strong women, and issues that affect the average person were what Ibsen focused his work on. Ibsen also wasn't writing in lofty rhymed verse, but in colloquial language, how people actually talk to one another. And when I say that Ibsen was talking about problems, I mean he was talking about things that we still aren't comfortable talking about today. Divorce, environmental issues and policy, incest, STIs, specifically syphilis, assisted suicide, and women in business are just a few of the topics covered in Ibsen plays that I have personally read or seen, and I have hardly cracked the surface of his work. A few fun facts as they relate to A Doll's House. First, it was the subject of a lot of controversy, particularly in Germany. People just could not handle the idea of a mother leaving her children. They seemed to think that it was the worst thing a person could do. The people of Germany were so upset that the play was not allowed to be produced there until Ibsen wrote an alternate ending. In this German ending, Nora does come back to the house when Torvald calls after her. Another alternate ending was created in America. The first production of A Doll's House in America was actually in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The script was ferociously edited, and Torvald actually saw Nora as a hero after learning about the forgery. This production was very popular, even though it only ran for 2 days. Ibsen's works created a new style of theater that wasn't afraid to talk about the human experience. Plays became more than just a source of entertainment for the rich, but a place to discuss the problems, wants, and needs of a growing middle class. His plays became art for the people. Again, please note that these plays before Ibsen were and are still art. It's just that due to social constraints, playwrights were limited in what they could write and had to do their best to involve social commentary. Ibsen is just noticeable for breaking those rules and creating a new kind of art. Ibsen's common themes and realistic characters also called for a more realistic style of acting. This idea of human psychology in writing characters will be further developed by Anton Chekhov. The award-winning Lucas Hnath is a contemporary phenomenon. His style is very unique and features lyrical formats, silence, and a little bit of the abstract. Let's see how Hnath used that to create a sequel that holds up. After Hnath knew that he was going to write a play entitled Doll's House Part 2, in which Nora would succeed, he started by finding a terrible translation of A Doll's House. In an interview, he specified that it was the worst translation he could find, and it came from one of those websites that was clearly made in someone's home with aggressive neon text and no user interface. You know the type. Anywho, Hnath started by stripping that text down to the bare bones. He removed everything we associate with the show, the chocolates, the nicknames, all of that good stuff, and he rewrote the entire thing in his own words. What he discovered was that Torvald and Nora are incapable of having an adult conversation for fear of it turning into an argument. Hnath decided that these two need to have it out with one another and actually have an adult argument. After that, Hnath worked with the actors to develop the script. Part of his style is that he creates a bunch of what he calls scraps, snippets of scenes with different tactics, objectives, word choices, all kinds of variations that he likes. Hnath and the cast then read through them, rearrange, edit, and develop the script that way. After they had assembled a Frankenscript, Hnath brought in a team of feminist and philosophical scholars to review, discuss, and rework the arguments made in the show. Hnath put a lot of emphasis on the validity of each character. Everybody needed to have logically sound arguments with no backtracking. Hnath's scripts can actually be described as argument plays. You'll notice that there isn't a lot of exciting action, and that everybody's really just arguing. And that's sort of the point. Hnath likes to give every character an equal chance to express themselves fully. He also likes unresolved chords and morally gray characters because of how they make us think. And life isn't that black and white either. I've mentioned the word forum across these lectures as part of the set description. A forum is a place in which everybody gets the chance to speak, but that also implies that other people are listening. So keep in mind that every character you come across in this play has a valid point. You are responsible for listening intently and closely without worrying about making a counter-argument. That's not what the forum is for. You are here to listen to these characters speak their piece. One of the most striking things about this play is Nath's use of colloquial American English, right down to the word fuck. There's also a shocking amount of humor, but remember that Ibsen was also writing in colloquial language, so it would only make sense for Nath to do the same. In regards to humor, Nath advises audiences not to take things so literally and formally. There is humor in bad things, people are sarcastic, and this play is an abstraction. Anyway, it's about the ideas. Not to mention, Ibsen's plays were thought to be quite humorous in his time. However, due to their thematic material, the English translations have all been made to be almost entirely dramatic. Nath's scripts are often formatted to look like poetry. In this segment of a monologue by Emmy, we have one of the best examples of that. This is actually a fragment of a sentence. Although it looks choppy, it reads like this. Never finding a home, never finding a place to rest, a person to rest with, never finding a person who knows you, and what do I know, but that sounds so sad, and so lonely, and so deeply unsatisfying, this future where we're all just nomads. Each line has its own emphasis, and is a thought entirely on its own. For acting, this gives a wonderful guide into the internal process of the character. When reading, it's about the operatives or the most important word in the sentence. In this case, the most important word in the line. I have highlighted the operatives in this fragment of a sentence. There's one for almost every single line. The other thing it does is it makes certain phrases stick out. What sticks out to you? In the page on script grammar, Nath notes the use of the ellipsis line and what it means. He states, an ellipsis in the place of a character line represents a fuller beat. It's a moment of thinking or rethinking or sussing or a look or sidelong glance, etc. Why does Nath feel a need to specify that? Because people just being quiet and people actively not talking are two different things. What's in the silence that isn't in the words? What are the characters saying that they can't or won't say aloud? What is going on inside the characters and between them? Do not just brush over these silences. Read them. Read into them. They are so important for understanding these characters. So, as I've mentioned before, part of my job is to play devil's advocate, and to find arguments, theories, and rhetoric about the shows, characters, and the themes. Here are the two that I find the most fascinating, and that I still find myself pondering. In an interesting argument by Toril Moy in Henrik Ibsen and the Birth of Modernism, he argues that Torvald Helmer is a complete aesthete. An aesthete is somebody whose main concern is for their appearance, for beauty in life, and for always keeping a perfect facade. They even generally have an idea of what perfect morals are. Arguments for this can be found in the text, including Nora's duty to keep the house, children, and herself in perfect attire, that her teeth mustn't be ruined, that lawyering was too morally gray for Torvald. Even Torvald's relationship with Nora relies on perfection. Torvald likes to pretend that Nora is still a virgin. He feels more manly when Nora needs him, and he loves to forgive her when she disobeys him for the feeling of manly power that it gives him. Torvald wants to be the perfect man with the perfect life. This facade of the upper class is exactly what Ibsen was trying to do, to destroy with this work. Take that argument into your reading of A Doll's House Part 2 and see if it still holds up. Is Torvald still an aesthete, or did he change? Is he just hiding that he is one? Are there any lines or arguments that support his change or his staying the same? Read critically. In that same book, Moy also points out the philosophical refusals that Nora makes with just one line. I am a human being before all else. The first refusal is the refusal to be known by the generic. The words mother, daughter, and wife are all words Torvald uses to describe Nora. But these aren't specific people. They're merely generic duties or responsibilities that he feels she has an obligation to fulfill. The second is the refusal to be known as the other. The universal, normal, generic figure is always male. John Doe, Joe Blow off the street, doctors, bankers, scientists, the average person, we all have it ingrained in our heads to default to male. Nora's statement refuses that. Female is also a valid human experience that can be related to. Women are people. Average, everyday, regular people. The third is the refusal to be tied to anybody else. In the same way that mother, daughter, and wife are generic, they are also tied to other people. Nora has always been tied to another person with responsibilities to that person. She wants to be an individual with responsibilities to herself for once in her life. So some questions we must ask ourselves concerning Adult House Part 2 are, what challenges, if any, does Emmy pose to Nora? Is there anything she says that would make Nora backtrack? Emmy's never been married. Does that negate her arguments, or is she strengthened by them? Are these two even in contrast at all? That's what I had for you for this lecture. Thank you for watching and listening, and as always, happy reading!